All right, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. And you are in the Progressive Caucus Action Fund's briefing on what the Inflation Reduction Act means for you. My name is Kat Rowland. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Legislative Affairs Director at the Progressive Caucus Action Fund, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. Today, we're going to hear from three experts on how we will feel the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act's healthcare, climate and energy, and tax policy changes in our everyday lives. After discussing these with each of the panelists, we are going to move to audience Q&A and allow folks watching to ask their questions about this new law. And then we'll close out today's event and preview some resources that we at the Progressive Caucus Action Fund will be sharing with you soon. I want to start off with a quick reminder that PCAF is a 501c4 organization, but I know many of you are representing 501c3s or you're here in an official capacity. Therefore, we're going to dig deep into policy discussions today, but we are not going to engage in electoral or partisan conversations. One other piece of housekeeping, we have enabled automatic closed captioning. If you go to the bottom of your screen and click on live transcript, you can enable closed captioning for yourself. As it is AI, it is often imperfect. So we will also be adding improved captions before we send the video of this event to you all. Before I introduce our fantastic panelists, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the circumstances that we find ourselves in as we gather today. We're coming together after more than 2 years of exceptional challenges, and at a time when working families are struggling to put food on the table and cover their bills. But despite these challenges, we've seen folks in every corner of the country join in solidarity and fight for the solutions that they deserve. They demanded affordable healthcare, a response to the climate crisis that's wreaking havoc on their communities, and a tax code that isn't riddled with giveaways to the mega rich. It is because of this tireless advocacy that we now have the Inflation Reduction Act, our most significant action to lower healthcare costs in more than a decade, our country's biggest ever effort to fight the climate crisis, and long overdue changes so that the ultra rich and giant corporations finally pay what they owe in taxes. Now, this law is not a panacea, nor is it perfect, and we will talk about some of the challenges that it poses during our conversations today. But it is a reminder that when we come together to fight for the things we need, we can win. And today we're going to dig into how we make sure that the wins secured in the Inflation Reduction Act make a real difference in our lives. So let's get started. We're first going to hear from Amira Sakira. She is the Legislative Director for National Nurses United, the largest union of registered nurses in the United States. She leads federal advocacy for the union, working to secure workplace protections for registered nurses and fighting to win Medicare for all and other health, environmental, and economic policy changes that would benefit nurses, patients, and working people. Amira is a longtime healthcare justice activist, and we're thrilled to have her here today to talk about the healthcare policies included in the Inflation Reduction Act. Amira, thank you for being here. In January, a number of the major healthcare changes included in the Inflation Reduction Act are going to take effect. Can you tell us what should families be on the lookout for? And is there anything that people need to do to make sure that the Inflation Reduction Act benefits them?
Well, thank you, Catherine, and thanks so much to the Progressive Caucus Action Fund for inviting me here today and for putting this webinar together. There is so much in this legislation, in this act, that we need to make sure working people, grassroots communities know about, so that we can make use of these exciting steps forward in ways that benefit our communities. So on healthcare, we have seen, and I'm sure many of the folks calling in today did a lot of work over the past few years to try to ensure that these really exciting steps forward in healthcare would make it into the final either Build Back Better bill, which became the Inflation Reduction Act. So there are a few really exciting provisions that did make it into this final version of the bill that I want to make sure everyone knows about. So the first is that families, you all should be on the lookout should be aware that the IRA has extended premium subsidies in the ACA marketplace. So this is the one healthcare provision in the bill that applies to folks that are not in the Medicare program, and has the opportunity to impact millions of Americans. So in 2021, those of you who make use of ACA subsidies and make use of the ACA marketplace will likely recall that Congress and the Biden administration passed the American Rescue Plan, which was a major COVID relief bill. And as a part of that bill, they significantly increased premium subsidies in the ACA marketplaces. Now, those subsidies were set to expire at the end of this calendar year. The IRA extended those subsidies for 3 full years. The estimate is that this is going to prevent upwards of 2 million people from losing their health insurance because they otherwise could not have afforded those insurance plans. So that is really important, and that's something you should be aware of if you were getting concerned about how you are going to afford the costs of your ACA marketplace plan after December 2022. You may not have to worry about that anymore because of the extension of these subsidies. So please keep that in mind. Now, if you are a patient on Medicare, if you're over the age of 65 and you're on Medicare, or your parents or your grandparents are on Medicare, there are multiple ways that you are likely going to see huge benefits in your healthcare, and specifically your healthcare costs, because of the Inflation Reduction Act. So first, the IRA is going to bring down the cost of prescription drugs in Medicare. This is a massive achievement. Many people across the country have been fighting to bring down the cost of prescription drugs for decades. And this is the first time that we have defeated the big pharmaceutical corporations' opposition to reining in the atrociously high prices of prescription drugs, in order to ensure that patients can get the medications they need without going bankrupt. So if you are a Medicare patient, for the first time ever, the IRA is going to allow the Medicare program to negotiate drug prices. And this is going to bring down the costs of certain prescription drugs for Medicare patients. It could also potentially have an impact over the next few years on Medicare Part D premiums, because the Medicare program will be paying less and Medicare patients will be paying less in their out-of-pocket costs. Now, I just want to make sure that folks understand that this portion, the portion of savings you'll see from drug price negotiation, is going to take a few years to come into effect. So the implementation of these negotiated drug prices, we're going to start to see in 2026. In 2026, we'll see it for 10 drugs in Medicare Part D. In 2027, we'll see it for 15 drugs in Medicare Part D. And then in 2028, we'll see it for an additional 15 in Part B and Part D. 2029, it'll get up to 20 Medicare Part B and Part D drugs. Now, we don't yet know which drugs will be impacted. So this is something to be on the lookout for in the coming years as we find out which drugs will be negotiated. For those of you who have illnesses that require very highly priced drugs, you may see a huge benefit in your out-of-pocket costs because of these drug price negotiations, and you should stay tuned in the next couple of years to find out how you will be impacted. It's also worth noting that drug prices are also going to be brought down through these new inflation caps in Medicare Part D. They're going to limit price increases for drugs over a few years. Second, I'm going to go through the drug price stuff. The drug price stuff is a little complicated, so I won't go too much into detail just for time. But second, the IRA is instituting a new $2,000 annual cap for Medicare Part D beneficiaries for their out-of-pocket spending. So for those of you who are Medicare recipients, starting in 2025, once you have spent $2,000 on out-of-pocket costs in Medicare Part D, you will no longer have a cost-sharing requirement. That is going to impact upwards of 1.4 million Medicare beneficiaries every year. It's going to be a huge benefit to our seniors. Third, If you are a Medicare patient living at 150% of the federal poverty level, the IRA is now going to provide you with premium and cost sharing subsidies. Right now, those subsidies are only available to people at 135% of the federal poverty level. So this is going to increase the number of Medicare patients that are seeing subsidy assistance for their Medicare premiums and out-of-pocket costs. And lastly, if you are a Medicare patient that relies on insulin products, this is a huge win that people have worked on for years. The IRA is instituting a limit on out-of-pocket costs for insulin for patients in Medicare Part D, and that out-of-pocket cost is $35 a month, which is a huge victory given the atrociously high costs that people who need insulin have needed to pay to get their life-saving medication. So this is going to have a huge impact on people who need insulin products within Medicare. Lastly, I would just note that if you need vaccinations in the Medicare program, we're going to see the cost sharing eliminated for certain vaccines in the Medicare program. So basically, to wrap it up, if you're in Medicare, if you have high out-of-pocket costs in Medicare Part D, you could save money thanks to the IRA in the coming years. If you take prescription drugs under Medicare's Part D or Part B, you could save money on your out-of-pocket costs in the coming years. If you take prescription drugs under Medicare, you may see more stable drug pricing over the next few years because of those inflation rebates. And if you take insulin and you need certain vaccines, you could save money. So these are the things to be aware of as the IRA comes into effect in the coming years.
Thank you for that fantastic overview. I know it's a lot, but it's all good things. You focused a lot on the laws, policies that target people who get their healthcare through Medicare specifically. And obviously those are tremendously important, but I also want to make sure that folks are aware that there are provisions in this law that will help folks who do not get their healthcare through Medicare. And you started to talk about that a little with respect to the Affordable Care Act premium subsidies. Can you delve into a little more detail about what the law changed there and what folks who get ACA healthcare plans can look forward to as a result of the bill?
Yeah, Catherine, thanks for that question. So for folks that are not Medicare beneficiaries, the IRA, the main thing that the IRA does that helps those of us who are not in the Medicare program in terms of healthcare is that it has extended these ACA subsidies, as I said earlier, that were first passed in the American Rescue Plan in 2021. So just to go into some of the details, people with annual incomes below 150% of the federal poverty limit in 2022, that's about $20,385 for an individual, about $27,000 for a couple. You will be eligible for zero premium coverage depending on the plan you select. People with incomes between 150% and 400% of the federal poverty level, you're going to be eligible for premium subsidies, and that subsidy level is going to be dependent on your income and also on the plan you're selecting in the marketplace. And really importantly, people with incomes over 400% of FPL, and this was new in the American Rescue Plan, people with incomes over 400% of the federal poverty level will be eligible for subsidies if your premium payments would be more than 8.5% of your income. So that was new during COVID, and that has now been extended thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, I would note, the wins that we've achieved in this bill on healthcare, particularly on Medicare and drug pricing, are huge steps forward, but they are nowhere near what many of us were fighting for together, right? So we are going to see the bringing down of costs of prescription drugs for Medicare patients or in the coming years, thanks to winning on Medicare negotiation and inflation rebates. But those negotiated prices are unfortunately not going to apply to plans outside of Medicare. This was a huge debate in Congress over the past 2 years. It's something that the Senate parliamentarian ruled on, and unfortunately, Democrats were not able to win the extension of negotiated prices to other plans. So those of us not in Medicare are not yet going to see those impacts on our prescription drug prices being brought down. So these wins in the IRA are an amazing step forward. They set the tone for what we need to achieve across the board for all patients, but we have more work to do now to make sure that we are able to ensure that negotiated drug prices apply to all plans, that we can bring down the costs of high prescription drugs for everybody living in this country, regardless of whether they're on Medicare, whether they have employer-sponsored insurance, whether they're using the ACA marketplace. We need to make sure that happens. So it is just a fact, there are more benefits right now for seniors on Medicare than there are for the rest of us. The ACA subsidies are a big win though. And in the coming months, I think we have an opportunity in the coming years to continue to move forward on Medicare drug pricing to increase the number of drugs whose prices come down. On Medicare expansion, that's a piece that we weren't able to win here on expanding Medicare to cover dental, vision, and hearing. And then on ensuring that prescription drug price costs lowering apply to everybody across the country.
Thank you. That's a great point. And I think, those of you who have followed the healthcare policy space for some years know that Medicare drug price negotiation has been something that folks have been working towards for a really, really long time. And finally seeing this barrier start to come down is, as Amira said, a tremendous step forward towards lowering drug prices across healthcare payers and expanding access to healthcare. So thank you, Amira, for that fantastic overview. And I know we'll come back to you when we get to audience Q&A. But for now, I'm going to move on to our next panelist, who is Ben Beachy, the Vice President of Manufacturing and Industrial Policy at the Blue Green Alliance. Ben has worked to transform economic policies for 2 decades in organizations fighting for climate equity, workers and immigrants' rights, racial justice, and public health. Ben joined BGA after 7 years at the Sierra Club, where he founded the Living Economy program to build cross-movement backing for investment, trade, procurement, and industrial policies that simultaneously create good jobs, tackle climate change, and curb racial, economic, and gender inequity. Ben, thanks for being with us today. So the Inflation Reduction Act provides a lot of opportunities for businesses and individual consumers to invest in clean energy, like credits for purchasing electric vehicles or solar panels for your home. But what do people need to do to take advantage of those opportunities?
Yeah, it's a great question. And thanks again for the opportunity. So first, let me say a word about what these investments mean for us collectively before I get to the benefits for individual people, because it is due to our collective cross-movement effort that these investments got across the finish line at all, amid like ridiculous odds. In short, the investments in this bill give us a fighting shot at a livable climate, millions of good jobs, and a more just economy. I mean, for me, they just offer a much needed dose of hope. Now, to be clear, we did not get everything that our communities need in this bill, but thanks to the tenacity of organizers and advocates across the country, what we did get was the largest climate investment in history, which moves us about 2/3 of the way to meeting our climate goals of 2030. So we have more to do, but that is within fighting distance of being able to protect our communities from the wildfires, the storms, heat waves, the floods that are growing ever more severe. Many of these investments will also mean immediately cleaner air and water for the hundreds of thousands of people, primarily in Black communities and other communities of color, who endure high rates of cancer and asthma due to longstanding pollution and environmental injustice. And at the same time, these investments will create millions of higher paid union jobs if we get the implementation right. Blue Green Alliance actually commissioned an analysis of the bill from economists at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And it found that the billions of dollars in climate and energy investments are likely to create more than 9 million good jobs to build a cleaner, more just economy over the next decade. And I can drop a link to that study in after I get done. That's 9 million jobs to manufacture electric vehicles, build offshore wind turbines, retrofit our homes to make them healthier and more energy efficient, and beyond. And if we get with strong labor standards, these jobs will offer good wages and benefits. I think it's safe to say that few bills this century have come close to this sweeping potential for good job creation. It really is an unparalleled opportunity for particularly hard-hit workers and communities to reap the economic gains of climate action. And that will only help to expand the chorus of workers who see climate action as essential, not only for future generations, but for next month's paycheck. It's also critical that the communities and workers that have borne the brunt of the unjust status quo be first in line for these economic gains. That's how we build a more equitable economy. And doing so is going to require all of us to shape how the money flows, which I can get into in a bit. So that's the macro perspective, right? These investments have the potential to be a big win-win for climate, jobs, and justice. But what would they actually mean for you, for your family, for your community in real, tangible terms? There are more than 100 different climate and energy investments in the bill, so I will not have time to give you an unexhaustive review of the answer to that question, but I can give you a few examples. And I can drop in some links in the chat afterwards that Sierra Club has a really good 2-page summary of some of these examples. Blue Green Alliance has a few fact sheets, etc. So in clean transportation, just for example, the bill will mean you can cut up to $7,500 off of the cost of an electric vehicle. And it means that 1 out of every 3 postal service trucks in your neighborhood and thousands of other trucks and buses across the country will be converted to zero emissions vehicles. Now that will let school children, truck drivers, and you breathe cleaner air. The investments will also help you cut your utility bills by hundreds of dollars each year by rapidly expanding access to affordable clean energy. And you don't actually have to do anything to get those cost savings. But if you do want to do something and say you want to install solar panels on the roof of your home, the bill will help with that by making it about $7,000 cheaper to do so. Speaking of homes, these investments would make it up to $22,000 cheaper to install heating, insulation, and appliances that are far more energy efficient so as to cut your energy bills and improve the air quality inside your house. Finally, these investments will also help to convert factories in many neighborhoods to produce less pollution and more of the solar panels, wind turbines, and electric vehicle batteries that we're going to need for the growing clean economy. And that's important because industrial pollution is the fastest growing source of climate pollution and a major source of toxic air pollution, particularly in Black communities. And it's also important because it means we can use the growth of clean energy to create good, higher paying manufacturing jobs in Black, low income, and other communities that have been hit particularly hard by the outsourcing of manufacturing, which has only exacerbated inequality. It'll also help us to stop relying on imports of solar panels made with forced labor in China or electric vehicle batteries containing cobalt mined by children in the Congo. The clean energy economy cannot be built on the backs of exploited workers overseas. So years from now, I think we will look back on this bill as the moment we started making the nuts and bolts of clean energy more equitably, instead of hitching our climate goals to exploitative production overseas. So how do you access the benefits of this bill? For a few of those that I just mentioned, like cleaner air in your neighborhood or lower utility bills, you don't actually need to do anything. For other benefits, like cutting the cost of electric vehicles or upgrading your home for energy efficiency, you're going to see the cost savings when you go to make the purchases. Now, there's a whole additional bucket of funds that are available to businesses and community groups as grants, for which groups and businesses would need to apply. And Blue Green Alliance is putting out a user guide in the coming days to help equip community groups, particularly in hard-hit communities, with the information that they're going to need to apply for those grants. And we can send that on when it's ready. So again, the potential for real tangible benefits for communities across the country, it's really not a talking point. It's a turning point. We have a historic opportunity in front of us to ensure that hard-hit workers and communities are well positioned to seize these benefits.
Awesome. Thank you. Those are some great examples. And yeah, it sounds like the user guide you guys are putting together will be much needed and much appreciated. My next question for you is about the opportunities and challenges that this law is going to present for state and local governments that want to invest in clean energy, because we know that historically, and you alluded to this, these kinds of investments have left out low-income communities and communities of color, and that those communities suffer devastating consequences because of that lack of investment. And this is something that unfortunately we are seeing just this month in Jackson, Mississippi, and the horrible results that, how a lack of investment has led to horrible results, and the water crisis that's happening there. So what can frontline communities do now to make sure that the Inflation Reduction Act benefits them? And what opportunities and challenges should they be on the lookout for moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, the history of this bill has not yet been written. It is an open question whether these hundreds of billions of dollars in investments that I named will chart a path to greater economic, racial, and environmental justice by flowing first and foremost to hard-hit communities. And the answer to that question depends on what policymakers do now, and what we push them to do. I mean, unless there is a particular effort to prioritize frontline communities, history will repeat itself. The chronic divestment that we've seen from frontline communities will repeat itself. Those with the most access to power will gain the greatest access to these funds, reinforcing the unjust status quo instead of countering it. Or we can write an alternate history, one in which those at the front of the line for these investments are communities of color, low-income communities, and communities facing environmental injustice, deindustrialization, and energy transition. So what does that particular effort look like? What can frontline communities do to clamor for these funds? And what can advocates do to support that clamor? The first step is to write the rules for how this money will be distributed. You know, the bill itself generally does not include those rules. It's very high level. The details of how the money is to be distributed will be written by government agencies like the Department of Energy or the IRS. Over the next year, they will be crafting thousands of pages of rules that will shape not only how these funds are distributed, but what our economy is going to look like by the end of this decade. So our task right now is to influence those rules. And that means pushing for strong equity standards that ensure the lion's share of the funds go to frontline communities. So for example, we should advocate for strong enforcement of the Biden administration's Justice 40 initiative, which aims to prioritize frontline communities for 40% of the benefits of such investments. We also need to push for strong labor standards so that the jobs created are not low-wage jobs without access to healthcare and unions, but high-quality careers that offer real economic security. And we need to push for on-ramps to those jobs for underrepresented workers so that there's actually equitable job access. Our opportunity to push for these strong equity, labor, and environmental standards in the coming months is going to be right around the corner, because government agencies are going to be asking for input on what rules should steer these historic investments. So I'd say frontline communities and advocates can do a few things. First, we can weigh in with written comments for the formal requests for input that government agencies are going to be putting out. Second, some agencies will be conducting listening sessions and roundtables to gather input, which creates an opportunity to organize people to show up and make their voice heard. Third, we can proactively reach out to the decision makers in these agencies and ask them for meetings to convey our top priorities for ensuring that the funds are equitably distributed. And lastly, we can make some noise in the press to say, you know, this is the moment, and this is a huge opportunity to put a thumb on the scale for racial, economic, and environmental justice, and we must seize it. And all of this advocacy, frontline communities must be in the driver's seat. Insofar as frontline communities want support in seizing the advocacy opportunities I just named, There are various national organizations that can help in democratizing the information that folks need to be strong advocates. So that includes, offering an overview of the different buckets of funds that are available, who the decision makers are to contact in the relevant agencies, what are the timelines for doing so, et cetera. And many organizations, mine included, are planning a bunch of webinars and materials in the coming months to help equip community groups to clamor for those funds that matter most to them. So, the critical thing here is that as we write the history of this bill, those on the front lines have got to be the ones holding the pen.
That's really well said. Thank you. One last question for you. This is something Amira alluded to with respect to the healthcare provisions, but I want to pose this question to you as well. A number of stakeholders have noted that important provisions were cut from the Inflation Reduction Act that would have benefited hard-hit workers and communities. And so what should folks who care about those provisions know now about how they can best advocate for their priorities going forward?
Yeah, it is simultaneously true that we lost some important priorities that we fought for, and that we gained the largest ever investment in climate action and good clean energy jobs. Both things are true. I think we should recognize our own power in delivering the hard-fought wins in this bill and use that as fuel to keep fighting for what remains. So just to name some of the priority investments we still have to fight for, we must keep fighting for care workers who take care of our children and our grandparents, often with low pages and low labor protections, often performed by women of color, all while childcare and elder care remain way too expensive for most folks. If we're going to build a low carbon, high care economy, we must keep fighting for care investments that were cut out of the final bill. As another example, we must fight onward to invest in our public schools to make them healthy, safe, and energy efficient. We must fight to create a civilian climate corps to create jobs for young folks while building our community's climate resilience. We must fight to create viable career pathways for workers and communities hard hit by the transition away from coal. There's a number of these priorities that were cut from the bill, and the list goes on. And I see a few opportunities ahead of us to push for these investments. So number one, the Biden administration has signaled that it intends to do more via executive action, and we should encourage that. The administration has a number of tools in its tool belt to channel investments to hard-hit communities, like the Defense Production Act, the Stafford Act, the National Emergencies Act, each of which grants a broad suite of legal authorities for the executive branch to channel dollars to supplement the investments that are in this bill. Second, there's an opportunity for state-level action in a number of states. In fact, several states are already leading the way in building on and going beyond the investments in the Inflation Reduction Act. Just one example, earlier this month, California lawmakers approved more than $50 billion in clean energy and climate investments, including public transit and other critical investments that were not in the federal legislation. And in fact, the California bill devotes 3 times as much money per taxpayer as the federal legislation towards climate, jobs, and justice investments. Other states are working on similar legislation right now as we speak. And lastly, I would say we have the opportunity to build on the momentum created by the Inflation Reduction Act to push Congress for further investments that our communities need in the months and years to come. And believe me, I know that getting Congress to act is no small thing. I mean, it was no small thing to get nearly $400 billion in climate and energy investments through Congress, right? Just a few years ago, these investments were fanciful. Today, they're law. 5 years ago, when many of us proposed the investments that President Biden just signed into law, they told us it could not be done. But we built unity across movements, bringing together unions, climate groups, and racial and environmental justice organizations. And it is that cross-movement solidarity that ultimately overcame the entrenched power of those who defend the status quo. Despite this bill's many, many near-death experiences, we all stuck together and tenaciously resuscitated the thing time and again. And it is that tenacity and that solidarity that delivered the goods. It is what delivered this moment of hope. And I think we can do it again. So this is not the end of the story, it's the beginning.
Great. Thank you so much, Ben. I'm going to move on now to our final speaker, who is Sarah Christopherson, Legislative and Policy Director at Americans for Tax Fairness. Sarah leads ATF's advocacy efforts with Congress and coordinates the coalition's policy work. Prior to joining ATF, she served as Policy Advocacy Director at the National Women's Health Network for 5 years, responsible for directing their advocacy efforts on federal health reform, among other issues. And Sarah also worked for Congress from 2005 to 2015. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us today. So much has been made about the fact that the Inflation Reduction Act allocates new funding to the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, so that it can make sure that the ultra wealthy are paying what they owe in taxes. Can you share a little more about the kinds of activities that this funding is going to allow and why those activities are important?
Yes, and thank you so much, Catherine. I also want to just quickly echo Ben's closing comments, about truly historic reform. So, of course, in the tax side, we also didn't get everything we want. But when we look at what we accomplished, especially in a 50-50 Senate, and we look at it was accomplished precisely because of what Ben described, coming together. It's truly phenomenal. So one of those big wins is the IRS funding that you mentioned. And most of the attention has gone towards the enforcement piece. But it's actually a huge win across the board. So I do want to describe a little bit of the kinds of activities, as you said, the money's going to. So first off the bat, a big chunk of that money, about $30 billion, is going to systems modernization and operations support, which sounds sort of boring, but is actually incredibly important. So right now, the IRS is relying on computer programming code that is older than me by about 2 decades. I think it dates to the Kennedy administration. So even when they have new hardware, they're still running this computer programming code that is so ancient that they're, one, running out of people who know how to code in that language. And two, they're really limited in the kinds of digital services that they can offer and the kinds of ways that they can offer new products, digital access to customers, to people who are filing their taxes, and also how to integrate them across the board, right? So the modernization money goes to modernizing their IT infrastructure, streamlining their digital services, beefing up their cybersecurity, right? Improving their data protection, making sure that this part of the IRS can talk to this part of the IRS in a seamless digital process. That's the kind of thing that if taxes are the lifeblood of a functioning democracy, if we want to be able to fund what we as a democracy, as a public, agree is important, we need to be able to actually have a modern, coherent, rational tax collecting system. So that's the first big chunk. There's also a chunk that goes to taxpayer services. And so literally hiring customer service representatives so that you have a live person. When you have a question about your tax return, or you haven't gotten your refund yet, or you thought your stimulus check, right, from the most recent round of COVID stimulus was going to come to your bank account, but it didn't come to your bank account. The IRS has been so starved for funding for the last decade plus that good luck getting a hold of a live person. This money goes towards, it sounds so basic and yet so critical, right? Making sure that when you have a problem, you're a working person, you're a low income person, you're a middle income person, that you are able to call and actually talk to a live person. And I will say, I've seen this even in my own family. My parents, retired chemistry professors, had a problem with their return. So you've got two bright PhDs with plenty of time on their hands. The amount of time they had to devote to trying to work with the IRS last year over something that was like $100, right? We're not talking about Jeff Bezos levels here. That is huge. I think it's the kind of thing, it's sort of like a pothole. You're not going to notice if you're driving on a smooth road, but you're sure going to notice if you hit that pothole. We're talking about improving real basic customer service. And then the last part, the sort of sexiest part, the part that's gotten most attention, is that IRS enforcement part that you let us off with, Catherine. And, there has been so much misinformation, so much fear mongering, some of it, I think really designed to even potentially provoke actual violence. So You've had one of the top Republican members of the Senate Finance Committee alleging completely baselessly, totally bizarrely, that the IRS is going to come after you with an AR-15. Absolutely not. That is not going to happen. We're talking about restoring IRS enforcement that has been slashed since the Tea Party era, right? So you saw the Tea Party wave in 2010, and then you saw the IRS enforcement money fall off a cliff. That, from our perspective at ATF, was very clearly designed to protect very wealthy, and I mean very, very wealthy tax cheats, right? And it sort of makes sense. Right now, the IRS, an underfunded IRS, has enough money to go after low-income folks, to go after working folks, to go after people whose majority of their income is in wages that gets reported to the IRS or withheld, small businesses, people with relatively simple tax returns. The IRS absolutely has the money to go after them. What the IRS has not had the money to do is go after, and I mean go after as in audit, hold them to accountability, ensure they're following the law. The Jeff Bezos, the Charles Koch, the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Meta, the Nikes, the Amazons. And so what we've seen is IRS auditing of like low-income folks who get the EITC. Maybe they made a small mistake on their return. Maybe they got an extra $50 that they weren't supposed to get. The IRS has been auditing those folks. What they haven't done, what's gone like right off a cliff, has been auditing the top 1% and corporations. So let me give you one quick sort of example on major corporations. Accounting rules permit you, if you're a major corporation, to count if you think you might qualify for a tax break. Maybe there's a deduction or a credit that's like iffy, but you think you have a legitimate, you might qualify, so you claim it. Before this sort of Tea Party wave in 2010 that slashed IRS budgets, corporations were claiming credits that they thought they had a pretty good chance of getting, like a pretty good legitimate chance of getting, because they knew the IRS was paying attention. Since audits of corporations have fallen off something like 50 to 70% since 2010, now there's really no penalty to sort of claiming every wild deduction you could possibly think of and hoping that an overstretched IRS just won't have a chance to look at it until this window lapses, and then you're scot-free, right? Then you've gotten away with it. So we have seen a sizable tax gap. Tax gap is the difference between what people owe and what they're actually paying. A sizable tax gap develop because the very ultra wealthy, and if anyone on this call qualifies, I'd be shocked, frankly. The very, very ultra wealthy and these major corporations, really what they owe and what they're actually paying has plummeted radically. So it's a chance to ensure that we have funding that we need to do the things that we believe in, that move the country forward, whether that's healthcare, whether that's climate efforts, by collecting the money that people already owe, they're just not paying. So it's sort of like putting a watchdog back on the beat, and preparing for, well, restoring all of the lost enforcement agents that we'd had, and then preparing for folks are getting older. A lot of the IRS workforce is set to retire in the next decade. So preparing for kind of what's coming.
So it sounds like, just to put a little bit of a finer point on it, if I'm from a low-income household, a middle-income household, I don't have anything to fear from this investment in the IRS.
Absolutely, 100% correct. You have more to fear from the fear-mongering than you do from the enforcement money. It is not going to be coming after you. In fact, both the Treasury Secretary Yellen and the IRS Commissioner Rettig have said explicitly before Congress, we are targeting the ultra wealthy. That's where the money is. That, we don't have an interest in going after you for $50. We want to go where the money is. And they've been very explicit about it. For the regular person, for me, for the folks on this call, for working families, to the extent that they experience this change at all, it will be an improved customer service. It'll be able to talk to a live person.
That's great. One final question for you before we move on to audience Q&A. The law also includes a corporate minimum tax. So can you give us an idea of what sorts of businesses are going to be impacted by that tax? Say I'm a small business owner. Is this something that I need to be concerned about?
If you're a small business owner with $1 billion in earnings, then yes. Everybody else, absolutely not. So, and this has gone by multiple names. If you followed it in the news, it's easy to be confused because in tax policy world, we love to call things 8 different things, then wonder why people get confused. Sometimes it's called a corporate minimum income tax. Sometimes it's called a corporate alternative minimum. Sometimes it's called a book tax. But it all amounts to the same thing, which is that if you are one of these massive corporations and you are going to your investors and saying, look how much money we made. We did fabulous. We're raking it in. And then turning around to the IRS and pleading poverty and saying, I'm broke. I can't pay any taxes this year. That it will assess the tax against what you are claiming to your investors. So not only is this going to affect the biggest of the big, and I mean, if you look at the 55 corporations who paid no federal taxes in 2020, major household brands like Nike and Apple who paid a lower effective tax rate than anyone on this call, essentially, it's saying you have to pay at least 15%. You can still have tax credits and still have incentives, and you can still do this or that, but you have to at least pay 15% on what you're going and claiming to investors that you did in fact make. So no, there is no small business that could be remotely affected by this unless your small business is Nike or Amazon.
That's really good to know. Thank you, Sarah. All right. Well, thank you all for your fantastic insights. We're going to move now to the audience Q&A portion. It looks like we've got about 12 minutes left. So I am going to do my best to take a look at the questions that are coming in and make sure we hit on at least each of the topics that we just covered: healthcare, climate and energy, and taxes. I'm going to start with a question for you, Amira. If someone's wondering when this insulin cap is going to take effect, would you mind going over the insulin policy one more time?
Yeah, so as a reminder, this will apply to Medicare beneficiaries specifically. It will go into effect next year in 2023, in plan year 2023, which is really exciting. It is a $35 per month cap on out-of-pocket costs for insulin products, including insulin pumps. And it is possible that after 2026, that some seniors may pay even less than $35 a month, but the $35 cap starts next year in 2023.
Awesome, thank you. Ben, going to direct the next question for you. Somebody asked if they, say, just installed solar panels on their house, are they able to access the benefits of the tax credits in the IRA?
So yeah, let me zoom out a little bit from that one specific example, because that's a question about for electric vehicles that we often get, as well as upgrades to your homes, like installing heat pumps or electric stoves, et cetera, right? There will be most things, I'd say, across the board. If you have already installed it, like in this year, you can still qualify for the benefits come tax season. The specifics matter, and so we don't have, the webinar is probably not the best suited tool to walk through every specific option, but I would say for most things that I rattled off in the bill, if you've already recently bought like one of the things that qualifies for a tax benefit, you will qualify for that tax benefit in the coming season. So that's good. There's a variety of explainers online that you can search for, and it will tell you precisely like in which time frame you should have bought the thing to be able to qualify for the tax credit, and for each of the things that are qualified.
Great, and thank you for zooming out a little bit. That's helpful to know. And just as a reminder, we're going to be sharing some resources after this webinar. If folks want to look into some of these questions in a little more detail, hopefully you'll be able to find the specifics that you're looking for. Sarah, going to direct a question to you now. Folks are wondering, when the IRS is likely to begin these audits of the ultra wealthy and corporations. When can we expect to hear about these kinds of investigations and audits, and importantly, for the government to start collecting the revenue?
So that's an excellent question. Probably not as quickly as we'd like, partly because they lost about 40% of the staff that really has an expertise in these very complicated tax returns, right? Where you've got money stashed all over the globe, or you've got all kinds of very complicated vehicles for hiding taxes. So much of that staff just disappeared during this era of like intense demonization of the agency, which frankly makes sense. Why would you say it an agency where you're being attacked constantly for just doing, a good, desperately needed civil servant job? They're going to have to hire that back. They're going to have to take some time to hire back. And again, we're not talking about agents who can handle my tax return. They're talking about agents who can handle Jeff Bezos's tax return. So I think it's going to be a while. I think there is a lead in to find that expertise, onboard it, get beyond some of the unhinged fear mongering that has been directed at people, and get them to say, yes, this is a safe, positive place to do a patriotic job.
Great, thank you. I want to finish up by directing one question to all three of you that came into the Q&A, but I think is also just a good way to close this out, which is, as we've talked about, this law is not perfect. There were items left on the cutting room floor that I know people really, really cared about. But as you've all mentioned, this has proven that the tenacity that activists have shown, the advocacy that's happened over the last several years is not fruitless, and that we can win the changes that we need when we build cross-movement solidarity and fight together. So I'm going to ask each one of you, what can we do to build on the Inflation Reduction Act to win the big changes we want to see next? Amira, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'm going to speak directly to just the healthcare portion. We are going to see patients across the country are going to see benefits to their healthcare because of this law. And so I think it's really important that we build on that momentum, that we use the success stories that we're going to see to continue to fight for increasing the number of drugs across the country that we are able to lower the costs for, that we fight for expanded Medicare negotiation. A lot of, with Medicare drug price negotiation, along with other healthcare goals that we did lose on in this fight for the Inflation Reduction Act, we were often stymied by congressional procedure, by the parliamentarian, and by the very, very close vote margin in the Senate. So we do know that we have the momentum to win lower drug prices for everybody, regardless of what type of insurance you receive. We know that we have now huge momentum amongst Democrats to fight for Medicare coverage of dental, vision, and hearing care, which is our fundamental healthcare services that our seniors need, and they need badly. We need to build upon this fight to expand Medicare to cover those services. And the achievements we have made so far, increasing healthcare access for seniors and others in the ACA marketplace, lowering the cost of prescription drugs, can give us momentum to keep fighting for these steps that take us towards achieving guaranteed healthcare, a Medicare for all system. These are really important next steps. And so I think we've got to harness, we I think are going to see patients seeing the benefits of this law. And as these benefits roll out in the coming year or few years, we need to harness that energy, harness the success to build upon it, to ensure that we continue to increase healthcare access across this country until we achieve guaranteed healthcare for all patients, regardless of ability to pay.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amira. Ben, same question. How do we build on the wins in the Inflation Reduction Act?
I think the objective number one, again, is to steer all of the wins to the right communities, right? Again, equity rides or dies on how we implement all these billions of dollars in investments. And that, like I said, that history has not yet been written. So you mentioned the tenacity and solidarity that got us this point. We need to deploy the same tenacity and level of cross-movement solidarity that got us this bill in making sure that communities who have endured the brunt of the unjust status quo are at the front of the line for the investments in this bill, right? Like we can't, I think too often in past fights, national groups have been like, great, we scored a big win in Capitol Hill, peace, that's it, now on to the next thing, right? Like that doesn't work for communities on the ground who have been experienced chronic divestment. It's critical that the same national groups that have worked hand in glove with a lot of communities on the front lines, continue to work hand in glove with those communities, supporting their leadership and clamoring for the funds as we go forward. That's thing number one. Number two is to keep fighting for more, right? Like we are not giving up. Like this is, again, if anything, we should use this moment as fuel. We should recognize that those wins in the bill, they didn't come from one member of Congress. They came from all of us, oftentimes in spite of our political process. And so we should recognize our own power in delivering what we got, and then use that as fuel and momentum to keep fighting at the executive branch level. Like I mentioned, more opportunities for executive action at the state level. California, if California can pass a law that has 3 times as much per capita in investments as the federal legislation, it's certainly not alone. Other states can move ahead and fill in gaps. And as we build this muscle of winning, as more and more workers see bold climate action as not just a hypothetical goal for some future generation, but like a very real way to deliver their paycheck next month. I think will expand the coalition that is fighting for more and more. So with success, success begets success if we steer this correctly, right? So again, more tenacity, more solidarity in the fights ahead.
Thank you. Sarah, same question for you.
Yes. So at Americans for Tax Fairness, we like to talk about building muscle memory, right? That get members of Congress, get advocates to do something, build that muscle memory, and it's that much easier to do it again. So we have known for a long time that raising taxes on the ultra wealthy and on major corporations is hugely popular. It's hugely popular with Democrats. It's hugely popular with independents. It's even hugely popular with Republicans. We've struggled sometimes to get members of Congress to recognize that it's hugely popular. We've even struggled sometimes to get fellow advocates to want to say the T word, right? The benefit of building on the success of the IRA is that we were able to cut down some of those silos, get beyond some of that sort of vestigial fear, and say, yes, we can absolutely afford to do the things that we want to do and need to do as a country. I can give you $500 billion right now if we make Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk pay some damn taxes, right? So I think it's having a sense of don't ever let anybody tell you we can't afford these things. There are very good policies, common sense policies, hugely popular policies that can win support in majorities in Congress to do the things that we need to do to protect our democracy, to ensure our public health, to build a clean climate going forward. And I think that's the message that we're taking to members of Congress is if Senator Manchin can raise taxes on tax dodging corporations, you can too, right? Like there's momentum here, there's movement here, and it's an exciting time, frankly.
Awesome. Well, on that note, thank you, Amira, Ben, Sarah, for your incredible expertise and for sharing it with us today. And I hope that everybody who's on is leaving with a more complete understanding of the Inflation Reduction Act. If you registered for today's briefing, you're going to get a follow-up email from us at PCAF with a video of today's briefing and with a list of resources that you can turn to if you want to dig a little bit more into the details. Now, if you got a starting now email and you clicked the link to join, you might not get that if you did not register. And so my colleague Heejin is going to drop a link to register in the chat please go ahead and register so that we can send you an email with some follow-up resources. And if you have any further questions from us, please feel free to reach out to us at the Progressive Caucus Action Fund, and we will be happy to get back to you. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you again to our panelists, and everybody take care.